Hi there. I want to talk about attachment theory today and talk about the main concepts that underpin attachment theory and also discuss the gold standard assessments for determining adult attachment strategies, namely the attachment interview and also assessments for children and infants. So that's the strange situation. One thing about attachment theory is it's highly popular, so a lot of people know about it. It's actually the most widely studied psychological theory, and with that comes the advantage that many people know it has a wide reach. It's really common for me to meet people that don't work in the field or are interested in attachment repair, yet they know things like anxious ambivalent, preoccupied, disorganized, all these ideas are there. And the difficulty is that a lot of times these same concepts are widely misused or misunderstood. So I just want to create a shared meaning here so we can talk about these ideas and actually work towards earning security, towards repairing insecure attachment. So let me start at the beginning. Attachment theory was founded by John Bowlby, and in the 1930s and 40s, what he was doing was he was working in orphanages and studying child separations. At that time during World War II, what was happening was that families would actually send their children away to rural orphanages in order to protect them from the war because cities were being bombed. And what Bobby found was that these separations, whether they lasted weeks or months, had lifelong detrimental effects on the children. So even after the reunion and the children were with their parents, they had chronic difficulties like anxiety, depression, acting out behaviors like aggression, bullying, lying, stealing, and so on. And this applied generally not only to the good families, families that were known to be providing good care to the children, and also this was true for families where there was known abuse. So this effect was essentially universal that separations were detrimental. And one of the other things that is important to know is that at the time this theory is being developed, the strategies that we know and that really are kind of the bread and butter of attachment strategy or attachment theory were not developed yet. And Mary Ainsworth was the first person to really flesh the theory out to make it more practical and to have real meaning in the world. So, what she did was she studied children and their parents, primarily the mothers, because they provide most of the care. And what she found was that the mothers were the most sensitive mothers, provided the best care, and these children tended to be the most settled and the most well behaved and also played the most. So here she came up with the idea of a secure base, meaning that the child internalizes the sense of feeling seen and known, knowing that the caregiver is good enough and will be there for them. So then they can not only rush to the caregiver and know the caregiver will rush to them when there's distress, when the attachment system goes off, they also know that they can use the caregiver to explore. So these two concepts I'll flesh out a bit more, really underpin much of this internalized attachment map. The way she was able to assess for attachment strategies was what's called strange situations. She standardized this measure, essentially taking in these direct observations. So she would go and actually be sitting in the family home, observing mother and infant and child, the family system, and then interview the adults, especially the mother, have a formal interview where she would ask them a series of questions. And based on that study, she was able to come up with a laboratory measure, a standardized measure, where you could take that dyad, the primary caregiver, and the child, take them to the lab, and essentially determine what kind of attachment strategies the child used. One thing I want you to take away from this is that attachment is a relational measure. So even though as an adult you might think, oh, I have secure or insecure attachment, it really is a result of interpersonal experiences. It wasn't just that you were born with insecure attachment or secure attachment. It's that you had attachment conditioning. This is an important idea to get because it means that we're all conditioned, and that's part of how you end up the way you are, and also part of the reason that attachment can be reconditioned. We can actually move the needle towards secure attachment. So these are important ideas to understand. And with Mary Ainsworth, the key takeaway for her was that she found that the secure mothers, the mothers that provided the best care and had secure children, they were highly sensitive to their child, meaning that they were able to sensitively tune themselves to the child, pick up the signal the child was providing, interpret it, and then respond in a good enough way so the child would feel like they got what they wanted and they could move on. At that time, this notion was actually highly controversial. Behavioral theorists at the time, this was the leading belief, was that the more you respond to a child's needs, especially their cries, the more that would reinforce the crying itself and the needy or clingy behavior, right? If you pick the child up, every time you do that, you're reinforcing it. What Bowlby and Ainsworth found was actually on the contrary, and this supports attachment theory in that there's an attachment system underlying this. What they found was that when the child had an attachment cry, right, they were distressed, they needed a stronger, wiser person to come and take care of them. When that happened, they would settle, and over the course of the first year of the child's life, the children that had the most sensitive caregivers cried the least and played the most. They explored the most. So this prompt and good enough sensitive caregiving was actually beneficial. It didn't reinforce this. I also want to introduce the concept here of overprotection or over caregiving. That's what I would call intrusive caregiving, meaning that it's not in the best interest of the child. It's actually in the service of the parent. I think the pop psychology term for this is helicopter parenting, where the parent intervenes too much. Another way to think about it is role reversal. It's there to alleviate the parents' anxieties. If you have young children, you know that not every time they make a sound or fuss, it's an attachment cry. And when it is an attachment cry, it's usually quite obvious, right? The baby will raise their hands, they'll look for the caregiver. The cry will be distinct. That alerts the caregiver to, oh, I need to drop what I'm doing and respond right away to the child. They need me. And when you do that, you help them settle. The attachment system can turn off. And the other system I also want to talk about is the exploratory system. So every human, every mammal has an attachment system. And then when that's on, we need a stronger, wiser caregiver to help us settle. In infancy and childhood, that's usually our parents, our caregivers. It could be grandparents, aunts, uncles, and so on. In adulthood, that could be a partner, a close friend. And when the attachment system settles, the exploratory system turns off. When the attachment system turns on, it turns off the exploratory system. So there's this balance, and we're meant to seek closeness to, it's called proximity seeking, where we seek out this person that helps us settle. And what we begin to internalize, if we do have good enough caregiving, if the caregiver is responsive enough and helps us settle, you have an internalized haven of safety. So you feel like there's somebody out there who will make me feel safe and protected no matter what. So when you go out in the world, you carry that experience in you. And the second idea here is for when the attachment system is settled, you have the experience of being able to explore, knowing that the caregiver will not only be there when you're distressed, they'll support your exploration. So that's the sense of a secure base. Haven of safety is for settling the attachment system, and secure base is for the exploratory behavior. And if you've been around children, you've probably seen this. They're constantly looking and searching, and if they can crawl, they crawl. If they can walk, they walk all over. Our son is starting to, it's our first child. He's starting to open the cabinets, emptying all the contents out, playing with them. They're constantly exploring, and then the moment they get, bonk their head or something happens, they get frightened, they cry out, the attachment system turns on, and then you need to respond. So it's this balance that happens of essentially exploring, being distressed, and you can internalize that. And one thing I wanted you to take away is that Ainsworth, what her studies showed was that the secure children, the children that had the best caregivers, the mothers that were most sensitive, ended up playing the most. They ended up spending most the time exploring, unlike insecure children who spend less and less time exploring. And I'll talk later about why exploration is so important. So let's talk about we talk about the infant, the strange situation. That's a way to assess the attachment strategies used by an infant. I also want to talk about the adult attachment interview, which is a way to assess attachment style or strategies in adults. So this is a way to measure strategies or mind states underlying caregiving and attachment in adults. It's a structured interview. It's actually a direct adaptation of the interview Mary Ainsworth was doing with the mothers when she was developing the strange situation. Mary Main, who's another kind of maverick, really big name in attachment theory, she took that interview and she was able to formalize it and restructure it, add some question, remove some question, and she came up with a approximately 60-minute interview that allows to get at the underlying attachment mind states in adults. With children, it's a bit simpler, the task of seeing how they respond when their attachment system is activated, because you're just monitoring direct behavior. There's not so much abstraction going on. As children grow older, even by 18 months, which is the upper limit of the strange situation, language really comes online, and there's a lot more abstraction and separation from direct experience. Children learn lying, deceit, masking. All of these behaviors make it very difficult to take in just physical direct observations and make sense of what the underlying state is. So what Mary Main did was she took how language is used by adults, specifically words in the context of Grice's maxims. I'll talk more about this later. And was able to get at the underlying internal working models. One other thing I want to mention here is that there's a separate tradition of social psychology that's distinct from the developmental psychology related to attachment theory, everything I've talked up to this point, and they have their own measures that are self-report questionnaires. You might have heard of the love quiz or the experiences in close relationship scale. You can go online right now, look up any of these quizzes or say, assess your attachment style. And what you'll land on most likely is a self-report that's a social psychology assessment. This is quite different, and even though the language is similar, it uses attachment theory and attachment language. It actually doesn't correlate well to the strange situation or the adult attachment interview, with the exception that secure people, because they have high metacognitive awareness and they tend to be able to accurately reflect on their own states and the states of others, when they do self-reports or are asked, what do you think about this, or what state are you in now, they'll actually be able to accurately assess that, and the results tend to cross correlate to something like the adult attachment interview, where it's a trained specialist who tells you what the attachment mind states are. But for insecurely attached people, which really is the the most relevant category here, and the people that want to work towards earning security, for them, they're in a state of low metacognitive awareness. Their ability to mentalize, meaning their ability to see themselves from the outside and see others from the inside, and also, of course, track their own internal states, track how the other person affects them, how they affect the other person. All of these interpersonal skills and metacognitive skills tend to be poor. They tend to have low reflective ability, low ability to accurately assess their own experience. So when you give them a self-report questionnaire, that doesn't tend to be so accurate or reflect what a trained professional would tell them the score means, or what their attachment strategies are. I'm reminded of one training I did on mentalizing. I think there's kind of a threshold score where essentially only secure people really score in this higher score level. I think like 5 or 6 out of 9. And for secure people, the common is there's nothing in what the secure speaker said that you could feed back to them or find out from reading it that they would be surprised by, meaning that they know themselves best. Insecure people tend to not be like that. They have actually gaps in their own experience, gaps in their own history. So even a stranger sometimes can tell them in a short interaction things about themselves that they didn't know. And the way that shows up is low metacognitive awareness. One thing with Ainsworth, coming back to the strange situation, is she recreated the original studies in low-risk samples that she did in the Western world. After publishing all of that data, she began to travel and recreated these studies in international settings. She went to Africa, specifically Uganda, and what she was able to show is that mothers who were the most sensitive, provided the best care, and had secure children, these mothers also tended to be highly reflective. So when she would give them the interviews and talk to them about their caregiving, how the child is, who they are, how they got to where they are, these mothers would tend to say, I know my child best. Here's how my child is, their preferences, what they like, don't like. Here's how I respond when they do this. They were really the expert on the child. And then they also knew how they ended up where they are now, meaning my life, my parents, my own parents, even great-grandparents and grandparents, all of that, how it led to the present moment. So they tend to have high coherence, meaning they could tell you their life story, and not only just chronologically, here's fact 1, fact 2, also the meaning of it. Here's how I feel about where I am in life. Here's how I feel about my child. So it was all integrated and coherent. There was one greater whole story. And then taking that and adapting it, Mary Main developed the attachment interview, and she was able to assess attachment mind states in adults based on that. And maternal sensitivity was such an important concept that early on there was serious consideration to rename attachment theory into sensitivity theory, because essentially the two measures were equivalent. More sensitive caregiving led to more secure outcomes, and then in the same way, insensitive caregiving led to insecure outcomes. Mothers that were able to accurately reflect on their own states of mind and also pick out the mind states of their own children tended to be highly reflective or mentalize well. So these concepts are quite similar. I have a different video on mentalizing that you can watch. This is such an important concept that one of the pillars, one of the focuses of attachment repair is just developing mentalizing, this reflective ability. And insensitive mothers tended to be have difficulty with mentalizing, and the way that played out is they would have a harder time picking out the signals and interpreting the signals of their children and responding in a good enough way. And I know as I'm saying this, you might be wondering, well, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? When the child wants something, you just give it to them. Why wouldn't every parent do that? Well, one thing that happens is we're talking about with insensitive care and insecure attachment, it's usually a higher risk group, meaning that there were other difficulties in the family. Say there was poverty, crime, danger, chronic danger, divorce, so the parents were separated, single parenting, family difficulties, medical concerns or serious illness, immigration, war. All these things really put a major strain on the caregiver. Just being a parent, if you have young children, you know how much effort it takes. They're so helpless. They need help basically around the clock, at night, during the day. You're always providing care. Imagine you also have a full-time job. You're struggling financially. There's other difficulty, marital difficulties, for example. It doesn't take that much to push you over the edge where you can't provide good enough care. And I actually say the most important, or one of the most important concerns to highlight here, is not only just the practicality of raising children and the conditions of it. Oftentimes it's actually the unfinished emotional business of the parent that gets in the way of good enough parenting, meaning that the parent has their own defensiveness or preoccupation. They idealize or deny. There's things they didn't finish. And when they become parents, that often plays out in the caregiving relationship. Remember, you have to be able to take the perspective of the child and give them what they need over and over again. If you have your own concerns or your own distortions, right, the way you see it doesn't actually match the reality of the child, that's going to make it harder to provide good enough care. So let's talk about what sensitive caregiving actually is. Mary Ainsworth found that sensitive caregivers, on the scale of 1 to 9, that's what the sensitivity scale is on, secure mothers tended to score, on average, 7.5 out of 9. Insecure mothers tended to score, on average, 2 to 3 out of 9. So if it's not obvious yet, what score do you think you would get if you scored 2 or 3 out of 9 on an exam? It's not so good, right? We're really talking about adverse conditions and poor caregiving when it's insecure attachment. I don't want to shame parents or people for their own conditioning. So what tends to happen is attachment conditioning travels down the generations. When you have sensitive enough caregiving, when it's good enough, you just think that's the way things are, right? Somebody else, when you were born into the world, somebody else interpreted you and your signals, made sense of who you are and responded in a good enough way from the very beginning. You begin to internalize that, it becomes automatic. So when you have your own children, it's just obvious. You can make sense of other people's signals, and you don't have to do anything. There's no intervention necessary. With insensitive caregiving, the parents have their own distortions. They don't accurately attune. They may misperceive things, mistime the response, or what they do provide is not good enough, or it's not the right thing. So there's this background sense of chronic anxiety with insecure attachment. The child grows up with chronic insecurity. As a parent, it's hard to separate that out. That high arousal state makes it difficult to provide very comforting and settling care, sensitive caregiving. So it just is the way it is. I want everybody, as you're listening, to realize that that's just the way it played out, and there's not much you could have done to change it. So coming to this work, to this material with a lot of acceptance and forgiveness and empathy for yourself and also for your caregivers, whoever took care of you. Um, so let's keep going and delve into the strange situation in more detail. The way Ainsworth designed this assessment is it's a series of 8 interactions. So first the mother and the child enter the room. This is a laboratory room, and it's just filled with toys. There's a couple chairs, and then as they get acclimated, a stranger walks in. The stranger and the mother talk. Then the mother leaves. The child is left alone with the stranger. The stranger is encouraged to help the child play or settle them. Then the mother comes back. And then the stranger leaves. Then the mother leaves. The stranger comes back. And then the mother comes back again. So there's another reunion. So 2 separations, 2 reunions. And at each stage, the child's behavior is being assessed. So the child is the star. Their physical behavior is being monitored. And the idea here is really just to get a sense of what happens. The strange situation is essentially a progressive stress challenge for the attachment system. What does the child do? How did they respond when their attachment system is activated? Can they rely on another person, not just their primary caregiver, to play and explore the room to help them settle? Because the mother, remember, she indicates that the stranger is safe by talking and connecting with them. All of that is being assessed. And the thing she took away from that, Ainsworth was able to essentially find a way to measure secure attachment and insecure attachment. In the very beginning, the categories, she came up with evaluative categories, so meaning that she not only had secure, she had meaning behind what the categories were, so avoidant or anxious, preoccupied. And this, we haven't really talked about the strategies yet. The funny thing about her work early on is she contacted Bowlby and said, what do you think about these categories? And he said, drop the qualitative descriptions and just stick with ABC, so there's no value assigned to them. Before this practical categories were fleshed out, she most associated and thought the best category was what later came to be known as anxiously avoidant or dismissive attachment, because these children just didn't show a lot of emotion. They mostly played with their toys, ignored the attachment figure, ignored the stranger more or less. And she thought, yes, this is good. Just, you work, you carry on playing. So let me tell you more about the categories. There is the A infants, which is the anxiously avoidant child. And what happens is when the mother leaves, these children don't protest as much. They show less separation anxiety. It's almost like, did this child even notice the mother left? They just seem to be continuing to play and ignoring this, the effect that the mother left. And then when the mother comes back, there's no warm reunion or greeting or request to be picked up. And one thing you have to understand is it's not just the child's behavior. I want to make it clear that attachment theory is not the same thing as personality types. There's what's called attachment conditioning. So depending on how the caregiver responds to the child, that creates strategies that the child responds to, meaning that they signal, they see what happens. If the response is one way, then they signal either the same way or a different way to get the response they need. You can think of secure attachment as the default. If you can have secure attachment, you'll because the caregiver provides good enough care, you'll have secure attachment. If there's no possibility, right, if the caregiver doesn't provide sensitive enough care, you can think of the insecure strategies as conditional strategies. So one of these is avoidant, anxiously avoidant strategy. What the child does there is they actively suppress their distress. They don't protest too much. They don't get too excited when the caregiver comes. And you might think that this is just the child's disposition, but it's actually about the dyad. So what happens with these anxiously avoidant mothers is they are not comfortable with closeness. They're not comfortable with feelings, especially negative feelings. So if the child was to cry and really protest, get angry or get sad, get fearful, the mother might switch from just being there physically and not being too close to actually negatively reacting to the child's outcry. So there might be berating or mocking, making fun of the child, or actively rejecting them, putting them down, walking away. So what the child learns over time is they actually need to suppress their attachment signals and suppress the feelings. So to an outside observer like Ainsworth in the very beginning, it might look like, yes, these children look settled. They kind of carry on, they play. The thing you have to realize with their play, with anxious avoidance, is these kids aren't super engaged in the play. The play is secondary. It's almost like a distraction. I just focus on these objects and clang them around. That's what Ainsworth described as clanging around with toys. It was an active play. And then the caregiver isn't recruited. So all these things serve to deactivate the attachment system. And then the B category was the secure category. So these children came when they came in the room and they were separated, they protested the separation. They said, "Mom, where are you going?" Of course, they're 12 years old. They wouldn't say that. But the body language and their expression, it was obvious that this was important to them, that the caregiver left. Now I'm left alone with a stranger. It seems like my mom let me know they're safe. So then they could use, in the interim, while the mother was gone, the stranger as a safe haven and secure base. So they could either play or help use the stranger to settle. And then when the mother would come back, they would want to be picked up. They would want to reconnect and reestablish, and they might be a little upset in the beginning and then settle quickly and continue with the play. So that was secure attachment. And secure kids played the most. They spend the most time feeling settled and the most time actively playing. So they're able to maintain proximity, they seek the caregiver out. And the last category, so this is C. So we have A, B covered so far. We have C, that's the anxiously ambivalent children. That's the adult preoccupied category. Different categories for infants versus adults. So originally the name for anxious ambivalence was resistant, meaning that these children, their attachment system, unlike the anxiously avoidant children, the dismissive variety, their attachment system was hyperactivated, meaning that they would be unsettled even when the mother was there. They would protest when the mother left. They would protest when the mother came back and would pick them up. It's like they couldn't settle. So Ainsworth came up with the term resistant, meaning that they're resistant to care. Of course, just like the avoidant, it's not the child's fault. What you're actually seeing is this upset, this lack of settling isn't anything unique to the child. It's just that what the child experiences is insensitive care. The care is not good enough, so they're upset. Of course they're upset. So when the is being picked up by the mother, they're letting the parent know, well, you're picking me up now. What about all the other times I didn't get picked up? This isn't what I want. I want something else. So there's seemingly this perception that the child just never settles. Why don't they settle like the secure kids? But it's actually this chronic misattunement. Sometimes the care is intrusive or just not good enough, neglect. And it actually creates this really unsettling experience. I mean, all insecure children have anxiety. With preoccupation, it's pretty high, it's much higher. So it's like you can't settle. That's the background feeling. All right, well, I think one thing I'll talk more about before we end is just how the attachment system can work. So the avoidance strategy you can think of as hypoactivating, meaning it's like there's, if the attachment system is a switch, it just switched off all the time. Anxious preoccupation is like it's switched on all the time. So it can't ever turn off. And then security is when you're distressed, it turns on. When there's a caregiver that's good enough, it settles and it's off. So secure people, it's not that they don't experience stress or they never get overwhelmed. They experience the whole range, and when they settle, they fully settle. With insecure attachment, it's essentially this chronic feeling of anxiety. You never fully settled or you never fully turn on. And that's very energy intensive, it's very draining. So just imagine having the experience of negative emotion all the time throughout your whole life, from childhood into adulthood. And you just think, well, that's normal. Everybody feels this anxious all the time. Of course, that's not true. I think secure people, one thing that's funny with security is secure people will tell you that, oh, the world is filled with secure people. Everywhere I look, any group I go to, I can pick out the secure people. And the other difference with security is that when you're born into a secure family, you tend to have secure attachment yourself. The care is good enough. When you're creating your friend group, you're able to pick out the secure people there. And then as you mature and enter adulthood, you travel with this group of security, not only your family, your friends, your partner. So you're insulated in this secure bubble. And it's not like you don't know that there's other people, people with insecure attachment. It's just this constant feeling of getting good enough care. With insecurity, what happens is you're born into not good enough care. Not by choice, it's just the way it is. And then the parents misattune, the care is insensitive. You feel chronically unsettled. The friends you're able to make tend to be also insecure because you're not able to function at a secure level. So these groups are almost inaccessible. It's not that they're not there. It's just the only people you can really form close relationship with are unreliable or unsafe. In extreme cases, right, they may be even abusive. So it's almost like, well, these are the only people that are available to me. And then into adulthood, there's a lot of relationships that break apart or end, new relationship, and the relationships never feel quite right. So there's this chronic feeling of unsettledness. So I think I'll end there, and then in the next class I want to talk in more detail about what each attachment style is, what it means, and how to actually work towards repairing each of these attachment styles. All right, well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed listening to this, and you can find more about my work at mindfulattachmentcoaching.com. There's upcoming classes and services that are offered all on the website. All right, thank you.